Okay, so for this project, what we're doing is foreground, middle ground, and background. So like we talked about earlier, foreground is things you can poke with a stick, middle ground is things you can throw the stick at and hit, and background are things that are too far away to throw a stick at and hit, or something along those lines. But we're talking about 3 different planes of space. We're going to use 3 different materials, 1 for each plane. So I'm going to talk about how to use the tempera paint today. So tempera paint is a lot like watercolors, except it's thicker. I think that's the easiest way to kind of understand it. It is water soluble, meaning it will dissolve in the water. Okay, you can thin it out with water. And it'll dry to have kind of a chalky consistency. It's a little more matte than acrylic paint. The nice thing about tempera is it stays water soluble, meaning if you leave it in a brush, you can wash the brush out later and it'll mostly come out. Okay? So it's nice for giving you a really flat look, and it's kind of good to learn with because I don't have to worry so much about you ruining brushes. So the things I want for this, I've got 2 kinds of tempera. I've got liquid tempera. Notice here that I only squeezed out a little bit of each color. It's a lot easier to get the paint out than it is to get it back in, and I don't want you wasting materials. A lot of people squeeze out huge amounts, or they feel like they have to fill up these wells. That's just not true. Just a little bit at a time, and if you need more, you can put more in, but use up what you've got first, okay? Think about it this way. We're all eating dinner together, and we have to share the meal, so don't start off by taking a huge amount that's more than you're going to eat, all right? It's impolite, it's rude. It's the same thing with our materials. We also have these cake temperas. The cake temperas are a lot like the watercolors you've used in here. They're pigment that's in a solid cake, and you add a little bit of water to make them liquid. Okay? So if I'm doing like a light skin tone, this is a really easy shortcut to take. There's also like a wider variety of the cake colors, so feel free to use those as well. Either way, but you can definitely mix the liquids to get pretty much whatever color you might need to get. So what we're going to really be focusing on today is how to maintain form in the drawing. So I want to keep my drawing looking 3-dimensional as I start to paint it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of water to my tempera cake here. And I want to start by, that's the other important things. We want water. We also want to have a paper towel. Okay? The paper towel is really useful for getting paint off your brush and also correcting mistakes you might make. So I want to have thin tempera. The idea here is I want this to be thin enough that I can still see my drawing through it. This is really important. So what I want to do, rather than like painting over my drawing, like I might paint a wall and try to get a lot of coverage, I want to get kind of a transparent layer so that I can see the drawing underneath. So I don't want a ton of coverage, I just want to start by getting a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add basically 3 basic tones, okay? So I want to have my local color, which is kind of the color of the object I'm painting. It's kind of my peachy color here. And I don't even have to worry about, let's kind of move that around. I want to have my shade tone, and I want to have my highlight tone, okay? So I'm laying down my local color here, kind of covering the whole surface that I want to be this color. So the great thing about the tempera, and something I really definitely want you to use, is that it can really cover, okay? So my goal is to eventually have this drawing like pretty much totally covered with paint so that you only see the paint and you don't see the pencil anymore. But I want to get there really slowly by building up layer after layer. So if this is like a little too thick, I can kind of dab it with my paintbrush a little bit. Pull some of that pigment off. I can add a little bit of water and pull it around a little bit. Alright, so there's my local color. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my shade tone. So I've used kind of a whitish flat brush. I want to kind of think about the area I'm trying to cover. And I want to use like an appropriately large brush so it doesn't take me too long, but also so that I can get into the areas I need to get into. For my shade color, I'm going to take a smaller brush because I need to get into some tight areas. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to this. I basically want to cool it off. I probably don't want to add black, okay? A little bit of red. So I'd go for like either a bluish or a purplish tint, okay? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use this purple as sort of my shade tone, and I'm going to apply it to the darkest area. This is kind of going to be the back of the head. I might go with more of a blue since I've got an ocean scene. And I'm going to take a clean brush, I'm going to kind of pull it over, okay, to get that gradient. I might actually wet this brush, but I don't want it to be too wet, so I'm going to wipe it off on my paper towel. And I should be able to pull a decent gradient over. Alright, so I'm going to apply that tone to my shadow areas. Use my clean brush to apply my tone. That's not good. Let's wash that off real quick. The nice thing about the tempera is it washes off pretty quickly. When you start getting into acrylics, it's a little bit trickier washing it off. So here's my painting brush, and then my clean brush, okay? So I think this is a really important idea, sort of understanding how to use one brush to apply the pigment or the color, and a second brush to move it around. So when we draw with charcoal, which we haven't really done in here, you'll use the stick of charcoal, and then you'll also use a tortillon, which is like a rolled up piece of paper. Let's soften this a little bit. And the tortillon is used to move the charcoal around. So by doing that, you can kind of get softer effects. It's like kind of painting with the charcoal. So the nice thing also about tempera is I don't have to worry about working super quickly. If I'm using an acrylic paint, I have to kind of do this blending before it dries, so I have to kind of rush a little bit. But with the tempera paint, I can just add a little bit of water and I can re-wet my paint and start moving it around again. So that's really kind of nice, especially when you're kind of learning how to do all this stuff and you're not necessarily going super quick. Okay, so I'm kind of maintaining my lights and darks. I'm building up my drawing, but I'm doing it kind of slowly. I want to work one kind of color area at a time. Alright, so after this, I'm probably going to clean these brushes off. Depending on how many brushes I have, I might just use a different brush or I might clean these ones off. I'm actually going to go with kind of a small round brush. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my highlights. So I'm going to put a little white in the center of my palette here. And for my highlights, I just want to think about the areas that are kind of most directly hit by the light. And just put a little bit of white on them. And the white's going to kind of blend in sometimes. If you want a nice sharp white, you can kind of stipple it, which means you just kind of tap your brush on there. And you'll get kind of a better white. Here. Alright, so that's the basic idea. I'm going to kind of continue to build this up slowly. I might even come in, now that I've kind of got everything laid out, I might kind of come in with my small round brush and start getting some of the details. But now I can start to think about kind of covering up my drawing and just adding enough paint to do that. So I really only need to define my local color, my shadow tone, and my highlight. And it's awesome if I can do like some gradations and have like maybe a tone in between all of those. But as long as I have those 3 tones, I'll be all right. So you kind of need to think about maintaining those shadows, that base, that local color, and that highlight, and you should be fine. You can kind of play around and add to the rest of it. Probably want to get a little shadow in there. Build that up. Also, I might start thinking about, like, since I'm doing a skin tone, there tend to be some areas that are a little bit redder, so I might think about doing like a bit of red or orange tone. I can clean my brush off, wipe it to make sure it's not too wet. You don't want it to be too wet. If you actually like put paper on top of the, or water on top of the paper, everything's going to get kind of messed up and move around a little too much. So you really want to think about like getting the water into the paper. All right, and after I've kind of gotten a layer of this, maybe I'm not sure if I want to keep going on this or if I want to kind of leave it where it's at. I can kind of move on to other areas. White hair. I want to move my paint, even though I'm using the white, I want to move it onto the center of the palette first, just so I don't get my white contaminated, and because once it's there, I can also control the thickness of it. That's a lot of paint. See, I broke my rule. I went straight there from the well. It's not good. Touch up my highlights a little bit. Then come in with the shadow tone. A bit of blue, and white, red. Also might start to think about kind of the quality of the light I want hitting. So I kind of want to have this effect like there's light coming down and reflecting off of this treasure here that he's looking at. So I might thin out a little bit of yellow. Add a little bit of yellow to parts of his face that are kind of being hit by that. Potentially kind of a cool effect. Alright, kind of soften it up. Might mix a little black into my shadow tones. I should wrap it up. Might mix a little black into the shadow tones. And just kind of hit the very darkest parts with that. I don't necessarily want to use straight black, but if I add a little bit of black to my kind of purpley tone, I should be alright. I can kind of get tighter and tighter and get more and more details as I go. Kind of gives them a little more definition. Blend those in a little bit. And I'll slowly kind of build up the painting in this way. Okay? So that's how I'm going to do my tempera layer. We'll talk about how to do the other layers later, but this is how we kind of get that tempera layer done. Any questions? All right. So once you've got like a nice shaded drawing, you can start doing the painting on that layer. Okay? And then we'll talk about how to do the other layers a little bit later. All right, cool. Yeah.
Can I use like a translucent blue paper from the glass around his head?
Sure.